Hey there, how are you? It is nice to see you. We've got a really good show for you this evening. We're going to talk to two reporters who cover a lot of inside stuff in the city of New York and the borough of the Bronx. And so let's get started with a reporter from the city, Reuven Blau. Reuven, nice to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
I was just expressing to you just before the show, you you have the honor of covering what I think is just one of the greatest disasters in New York, and that is Rikers Island. Um, let's just get right to it. The city announced that they will no longer announce or report publicly anyone who dies in Rikers Island. So, therefore, all kinds of who knows what's happening could be happening and people dying in there, and nobody will know about it. Somehow this doesn't work for me, but what do you think?
Yeah, so just a little bit of history for your audience.
Yeah, sure.
So what typically happens is the city of New York, when somebody passed away, would send out a press release to the reporters, just kind of giving them basic information like the name of the person, the facility, the time of death, and if there's any other kind of basic information, in regards to the fatality or the person's passing. This practice started in the last 6 months of the De Blasio administration under Commissioner Vincent Giraldi, who is a reformer. When Eric Adams took over, he appointed Louis Molina. He asked Vincent Giraldi to leave, and it was kind of a controversial decision somewhat because even the new mayor is allowed to kind of change staff. Vinny Giraldi had actually asked to stay on and was kind of seen by the activists and reformers as a real reform-minded commissioner. And there's been a lot of attention. The year before, there was 19 deaths on Rikers Island or in the other city jail lockups, and that was actually the highest rate in about 25 years. So each death was highlighted by the media. Would get a lot of attention. And now the city is saying, look, we've changed our policy. Somebody just recently passed away. He was in the medical unit. It's called PACE. And he jumped off a tier in the unit and passed away shortly thereafter. And there was no press release. And there's a new press spokesperson. His name is Frank Dwyer. He came over from the FDNY. And I asked him, I said, hey, why didn't you put out a press release announcing this person's passing? And he said, look, we are not doing that anymore. And his explanation was, this is a change in, it was a practice, it wasn't a policy, and now we are changing the practice. And he also pointed out, he said, look, we do notify multiple different groups, including 7 different bodies. And out of the 7, it's, I think 4 or 5 of them are in the Department of Correction. It's, there's an investigative unit, the chaplain who has to kind of notify the family. But these groups don't necessarily always let press or media know. And
of course,
they do have to kind of list it at the end of the year. But again, there's a lot of time that passes from then. And they also do let the city's Board of Correction know, which is the oversight agency. And again, which is a group that doesn't always necessarily notify the media or is aware to notify the media, and the state AG's office. The one thing that people are saying is that, look, what does this really mean? I mean, ultimately, reporters like yourself have sources. They're going to find out and know about these fatalities. And that is correct. Generally speaking, especially now, there's a lot of attention on Rikers. We're going to find out about this stuff. But there has been times where it doesn't always happen. And I actually had heard from a former PR person who worked for the department who told me years ago they were waiting for my call and they had a statement ready to go about someone who had passed away. And I never did because I wasn't told. I wasn't notified.
Here's what my take is from hearing. I mean, I've known a lot of this history. Is if they do that, rather than have the attitude, we have problems here, we want to work to solve them, we want to engage the public, we want to, do whatever we can. This sounds like we have problems, we just don't want to tell anybody about it. And that suggests to me that a place that is, by all accounts, an absolute horror show. Happily, I have never been in there and I've never visited there. I suppose I would appreciate a visit at some point. But that just suggests to me that we're not looking to solve problems. We're looking to cover up problems. And as a journalist, as a talk show host, as a reporter, and as a citizen, that is very disturbing when you've got very difficult. All the stories that emerge, not only deaths, all the stories are just so disturbing that come out of Iraq. So that's my impression of it. That the specifics that you deal with every day is one thing, but the general thing that this is out of control is now it's underscored to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone would say that it's hard to, change something when you don't acknowledge the issue exists, and if you're not going to acknowledge, deaths is really the final moment where so many things usually go wrong when it comes to that, a death.
Yeah, and there are so many reasons why somebody, it could be somebody smuggled drugs, it could be they're having some reaction to not getting the drugs, it could be a violent thing, it could certainly be a mental health thing, it could be somebody who's literally going crazy psychologically, being in jail and being in this client, could be anything. I want to ask you about this aspect of it. I have to giggle a little bit that the federal monitor's name is Steve Martin. We assume it's not the famous Steve Martin, who is a
Yeah.
wonderful comedian. But at this point, as just somebody who talks to people like you and reads the newspapers and tries to follow what's going on, I think it's time for somebody to step in, because this is out of control. And this last bit is an example of it.
Yeah, I mean, so just again, also kind of back it up for the
Yes,
audience.
please do.
There's a federal monitor that's been in place since 2015, based on a kind of a class action lawsuit that was filed by a group of people who were locked up, who were being abused, the younger inmates, and that was also joined by the Southern District of New York, the federal prosecutor in Manhattan. And their solution was to this case, where they found all these abuses going on, was to appoint this federal monitor. And what he essentially does is he issues these reports about once or twice a year, 2, 3 times a year, actually. And it's been progressively worse, right? Like, since he's been in place, he's been saying, hey, the violence is worse. A whole litany of kind of metrics that they look at have just gotten worse and worse. So there's been a real call now to have the federal judge say, enough of the monitor. It isn't working. It's been since 2015. Let's appoint a federal receiver who would potentially take over and start from scratch and have a ton of power to kind of do, kind of enact these reforms that people are calling on for.
Are you aware that this has been done, or would this be a very unusual thing for a federal monitor to take over a jail? Certainly one in New York City. But do they do this sort of thing, or would this be really, a stick out, stand out moment?
It's a great question.
I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
asking.
that's a great question. There has been federal monitors. There's actually one in California. Sorry, currently over the jail system, over the healthcare of prisoners, state prisoners.
Okay.
There's one in Mississippi, I believe. There was one in Chicago over the juvenile, the younger detainees, and that was actually a pretty big success. I mean, it takes time. It's not an overnight situation.
Yes, of course.
But
And well, here's the other thing connected to it, and I want to ask you about another article that you wrote. Here's the other thing connected to it. Of course, they're talking about closing down Rikers, so it's almost like the federal monitor take it over, reorganize it. But that's not going to happen right away. We're still a few years away from really being able to do that. I just think some oversight needs to be done. And here's the headline: Secrecy on severe jail injuries spur Rikers monitor to sound alarm. And this is the kind of thing that can't be accepted. And this is in your work. Detainee at city's floating jail, which is the Vernon C. Bain Center, on a boat, was on life support for 2 weeks after he was tackled by a guard. Now, maybe it was the only way to deal with this person and the problem, but we all should know about these things. And of course, if something improper was done with the guard, we also should all know, and of course the people in corrections and even the union should want to have a guard who's misbehaving taken out.
yeah, I mean,
So I don't know what to say. It's
yeah.
just crazy stuff, man. Go ahead. I'm
No,
just
yeah,
throwing it at you. I'm
no,
out of words for it.
yeah. I mean, I think, one of the biggest things the union has said for a long time is that, like, we are unfairly kind of accused here, and our voices don't count as much, and they're kind of drowned out. But at the same time, when there are reforms that are proposed and changes, they have opposed, a lot, almost everything that has come out in the last decade or so, or if not longer, about, kind of trying to improve things. This is an example of that. Is, if there was body camera footage, potentially, it would actually help kind of clarify what happened with this detainee who was tackled twice, including once it apparently appears when he was shackled. Again, if they were wearing body cam, I think, there is some footage, but it's unclear. It's blocked. There's some parts of the incident are blocked based on where they were standing. So, I mean, again, if some of these reforms were actually enacted earlier, if they are rightfully arguing that, like, they had done nothing wrong, this footage would make that very clear, and it just doesn't exist right now.
Another item in your piece is the plain numbers, and that is that in 2016 there were 74 serious injuries from use of force, and hold your breath. In 2022 there were 434 serious injuries. Boy, if that's not an indication that there's a problem. I do want to just mention, you and I were talking about it before the show. There was a story in the Daily News of kind of a whistleblower within the system who sent emails through the system to try and say, "Hey, there's a problem here," and now that person was suspended. That is an indication that what I said at the beginning. They don't want to solve any problems. They just want to cover them up. Like, we got problems, but let us deal with it. It's kind of the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, and some of this is going to be aired out. The judge has ordered a hearing on Tuesday, and to kind of ask the department to kind of explain. There's 5 incidents that were flagged, including this one where somebody was paralyzed, and these 2 deaths. So, some of that will be aired out, hopefully. And I think people are expecting on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, at this federal hearing.
We only have about a minute, so let me just ask your personal thought about what should be done. Are you in favor of a federal monitor, or just let it go till we can close it down? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think I defer to what other experts have said, and and in this case, I talked to the federal monitor who handled the juvenile system, the reform of juvenile system in Chicago, and he had a great line that stuck with me, and he said, "Look, it takes courage. It takes a judge to have some courage to actually understand that the previous commissioners, there's been a lot of previous commissioners, and none of them have come in and said, we want to make the place worse. They've all tried to make things better, and none of them have accomplished in across the board improving the situation. So, there's a sign, there's a history here of it all working.
That's an indication that the system is larger than the goodwill and the even talent of some of the people who are trying to solve it. Listen, Reuven Blau, a reporter We Can See the City, reporting for New Yorkers. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your great work. Listen, if not for you, we'd really would not have anything. And we'll keep reading all your great work in the city. Say hello to all our friends over there, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks again for having me.
Okay, folks, we'll take a very short break, and then after we take that break, we're going to go to Gotham Gazette. We'll be right back.